Hello YouTube. As an introduction to March's challenge of hash segment I would like to have a brief chat with you about making segments on a table saw. That's how I do it, and I suppose that's how most of you will have to do it. And yeah, it's not as straightforward as it seems, or maybe it is, but quite a few things which you have to take into consideration, and I'd like to elaborate a bit about those. First of all, what's important? The most important thing if you are doing segments are of course the angles. If your angle is off, even by a little bit, then a ring of an X number of pieces will not fit together properly. So you have to do that as accurate as you can. Tools you have for that are, there are several ways. You have your dial on the machine itself. Something like this. This is the guide. This slides through a slot on the machine, and you can set the angle here. You can use calculations, trigonometry from school, but it's a bit tedious, and the problem with that, I think, is to measure the corresponding distances correctly. Then you can do it by a method which a lot of people can use, but it costs a bit more wood, so you have to utilize a scrap piece, and that is by interpolation, which means that you try to set the angle, then cut a number of pieces, and then fit them together to see if they add up to whatever you want to aim. You could, for example, if you want to make a 12 segment ring, cut 3 scrap pieces, put them together and check if the angle is exactly 90. And then if it's a bit off one way or the other, you can adjust for that and try again. Another method is of course with digital or other kind of tools. I happen to have from my machining days, metal machining that is, I happen to have a set of angle pieces, and one of them, like this, happens to be the angle for 15 degrees. So if I set that up on my table saw, then I can make for a really accurate angle. The next important thing is the length of the segments. For rings which are intended for wood turning, it's perhaps not that important, because you can always cut away what you do not use, but at least you have to make sure that the dimension of the resulting ring is always bigger than what you want to make out of it. Yeah, I think the third one is of course the thickness. I do not have a planer or that sort of carpentry equipment, so what I typically do is I take a single piece of wood with a uniform thickness, and I use that to cut my segments off, and then at least I know that all the segments are of the same thickness. Okay, then we come to the setup of the table saw. The first thing that comes to my mind there is that you need to have a really sharp blade. I'm going to cut a few segments shortly, and I just switched out my blade this morning for a freshly sharpened one. Then very important for your safety is that you have to use a stop block. Table saws typically have guides that you can use to guide your wood along, and that allows you to cut a slice of a constant thickness. But with segments and that sort of pieces, chances are that the piece which has just been cut off gets entangled between the saw blade and the guide, and that can give you very nasty accidents. It can also damage your saw blade or even your machine. So what you do is you use a stop block to set your distance, and then you slide your wood forward from there while holding it against the guide. That is the this one with the angle set, and then it slides past the stop block, and essentially it lies free as soon as it is cut off completely, and that's a much safer way of doing this. So yeah, that's about all I wanted to say up front. Let's get to the saw and cut some wood. When setting up the angle, I like to do it from the back side like this, so I have my guide for the wood, and then here I have the angle piece. I put it against the saw blade, make sure that it is completely flat against the blade, and no pressure, of course, because you don't want to bend the blade. And then it's almost correct. That's it. So that's how I can set up an angle for 15 degrees really quickly. Next thing is the stop block. I'm using this piece of oak as my stop block. I'm moving this guide in, and then I move the stop block back. And then we have the distance set. So now I've cut 3 pieces. Let's check if they add up to 90 degrees. A sharp blade, so minimal tear out. Well, I'd say that's plenty accurate enough. Let's cut the rest. After I've cut them all, there are a few loose fibers at the end of the cut, so I'm using a piece of sandpaper to get rid of those. And as you can see, that's not a bad fit at all. So we can put some glue on her. It's 2 days later. I wanted to do this yesterday, but then was the go live of the challenge, so I was occupied most of the evening. But here is the glued up ring. On this side still a bit of the newspaper remains, but that's a matter of sanding it, and then it will be good to go. That's the tie wrap gone.